I'm Ben. You don't need to know much more about me than that, at least not yet. I'm not the hero of this story, nor the villain, just the guy who made a choice, the same way we all do sometimes. That was the problem, really. We were all just living, trying to have fun. When you're in your 20s, it's easy to feel invincible, like nothing can really hurt you. You don't think about the quiet, the deep, oppressive silence that fills the air when you step out of your comfort zone. No one ever does, until it's too late. Sarah, my girlfriend, and I had been planning this trip for months. Liam and Emily came along for the ride too. The four of us had spent years together, enough time to know each other's quirks, but you wouldn't have known from the way we acted that we were all deeply different. Sarah was always the quiet, calm one. She never worried. She didn't panic, even when the forest felt too thick, the shadows too long. I suppose that's why I fell in love with her. She made everything feel okay. Liam was the joker, the guy who could lighten any mood with a stupid joke. But then, that was always his way of avoiding the serious stuff, the quiet stuff. Emily was the thinker, always planning, always thinking ahead, worrying about things we weren't even sure were real. She was the one who questioned everything, too much sometimes. We decided on a remote campsite, a place off the beaten path, where we wouldn't be bothered. It was supposed to be the perfect escape. No phone signal, no distractions, just us and nature. We joked about how nice it would be to disconnect for a few days, but deep down, I think we all wanted to forget something. It wasn't just the cell service we left behind. It was the noise of the world. The constant demands, the pressure, the chaos, and I think we all hoped that in the wilderness, we'd find something we'd lost along the way. We parked our cars by the edge of the forest, just before the trailhead. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows on the ground, the colors of dusk settling over the trees like an old blanket. The campsite itself was small, just a few fire pits, a few picnic tables, and a lot of trees that seemed to whisper if you listened closely enough. Emily, ever the planner, was already eyeing the layout of the place, making sure our tents were set up in just the right spot. She always liked to be in control of things. I respected that about her. Liam, meanwhile, was already cracking open a beer and kicking a stick into the lake, smiling like a fool. Sarah and we just worked together in silence, comfortable with the rhythm of the task. By the time the sun was completely gone, we had a fire going. The crackling of the flames was the loudest sound in the entire world. Everything else, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that stretches on too long, makes you think too much. But then, it wasn't a bad quiet. I thought we were just enjoying the moment. I thought everything would be fine. We sat around the fire, the orange glow casting shadows on our faces, our voices low and lazy. Sarah and Liam told stories. Emily contributed her share of cynical commentary. I watched them all, the firelight dancing in their eyes. We'd known each other for years, but there was a distance now. Something had changed, though none of us spoke of it. Maybe it was because we were all a little older, a little worn. Maybe we were all just looking for a reason to laugh. It was as the fire started to die down and the stars were becoming clearer that I first noticed it. There was a shape at the edge of the trees, a shadow, barely there. At first, I thought it was one of us getting up to use the bathroom. But then I realized we were all sitting in the same spot. No one had moved. My heart skipped a beat as the shape stayed still, unmoving. My eyes locked on it, but it didn't move. I tried to shake it off. It was just the shadows playing tricks, right? The firelight flickered, and for a second, it looked like there were more shapes, more figures standing just outside our campfire's range. But when I looked again, the shapes were gone. No one said anything about it. I couldn't tell if it was just me being paranoid, but the feeling was there, deep in my gut. We all went to bed soon after, though I found it hard to fall asleep. The tent was tight, the air inside hot and stuffy. I kept hearing rustling, small noises just beyond the fabric. It felt like the whole forest was alive, moving, shifting in ways it wasn't supposed to. I tried to ignore it. After all, I wasn't the only one who heard it, right? There was no way I was the only one feeling it. But then, just before sleep fully claimed me, I heard it, a whisper. Low and distant, but clear enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, but the whisper, it wasn't wind. It was words. The voices were faint, too far to understand, but still distinct, like a murmur across a crowded room. My heart began to race, my breath shallow. I rolled over, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness of the tent. The whispering didn't stop. It came and went, and every time it did, I felt it. Someone, something, was just outside, watching. I should have called out to the others. I should have woken Sarah, but I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I lay there in the dark, listening to the whispers and wondering if I was losing my mind. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep, though I didn't know how. The morning came too soon. But even as the sun rose, there was something off about the campsite. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the trees seemed to loom over us. The way the birds, the ones that should have been singing, were quiet. Stillness. I'd been awake for an hour or so, but no one had come out of their tents yet. They weren't sleeping, not exactly. They were all just still. And I knew then that something was wrong. Tomorrow would be worse. I didn't know how, but I could feel it. I should have told them, but then I didn't. The morning light broke through the trees, though it did little to chase away the unease that had settled into my bones. The air still felt thick, heavy in a way that wasn't natural for the start of a new day. I had expected the early sunlight to wash away the discomfort, to make everything feel normal again, but it didn't. The stillness of the forest wrapped around us like a blanket, suffocating and tight. The trees were so close that they seemed to lean in, watching us, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't know how to. I didn't know what to say. Liam was the first to emerge from his tent, stretching his arms wide with a yawn, completely unaware of the tension that clung to the campsite. He smiled at me, his usual easy grin, the kind that made everything seem like it was fine, even when it wasn't. But there was a nervous edge to his smile, a flicker of something that he couldn't quite hide. He had to feel it too. We all did. "Morning, man," he said, his voice low and groggy, though his eyes were darting around the campsite, the same way mine were. "What time is it?" "Too early," I muttered, rubbing my eyes, though I wasn't tired anymore. If anything, I was wide awake, the events of last night still fresh in my mind. Liam didn't press, he never did. That was one of the things I liked about him. He could sense when things were off and choose to ignore them, just like I was doing now. But there was only so much silence we could share before it became unbearable. Sarah and Emily slowly emerged from their tents, each with the same sluggish, tired look. None of us had slept well. We didn't speak as we gathered around the fire pit, still cold from the night before. The crackling embers were nothing more than a dull glow now, like the life had been drained from them. "We should probably get going soon," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she were afraid to disturb the unnatural calm of the forest. "The hike to the next spot isn't that far, and we could use some fresh air." Her words were meant to be casual, but I could tell they were more of a suggestion than a plan. The way she said it, carefully, as if walking on fragile ground, told me everything I needed to know. We were all thinking the same thing. We wanted to leave, but none of us said it out loud. "Yeah," Sarah agreed, but there was hesitation in her voice too. "Let's give it another hour, then we'll head out." The forest held us in its grip, and I couldn't help but feel like we were the prey. The way the trees towered over us, how they seemed to close in on the campsite, made it feel like we were trapped. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the reach of the firelight, watching us. But when I looked, there was nothing, just the thick blackness of the woods, undisturbed and still. Liam tossed another log on the fire, the crackle echoing loudly in the quiet morning. We sat around it, each lost in our own thoughts, the silence growing heavier with every passing minute. I kept wondering if I should tell them, if I should bring up what I had heard last night. But I didn't. I didn't want to be the one to sound crazy. I didn't want to be the one to spoil the trip. But then Emily stood up suddenly, her hand clutching her forehead as though she had a headache. She turned to us, her face pale, eyes wide. "Did anyone else hear something last night?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Something. Moving?" We all froze. There it was. The thing we had all been avoiding, the thing none of us wanted to admit, but that we had all been feeling. The rest of us exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. I was the first to speak, my voice hoarse and uncertain. I heard something, I admitted. Voices. It sounded like whispers just outside the tent. Liam shot me a glance. I thought I heard something too, he said, his usual confidence wavering for the first time. But I figured it was just wind. You know how the trees can sound at night. Maybe, Sarah said, though I could tell she didn't believe it. Her voice was tight, strained, but it was different. I felt like someone was watching me, even while I was in the tent. The words hung in the air, each of us realizing the same thing. We had all felt it, the presence, the feeling that someone, something, was out there, waiting for us to fall asleep, watching us as we slept, studying us, making us their prey. And now it wasn't just the whispers that disturbed us, it was the absence of sound. The birds, which had been silent the whole morning, had stopped chirping completely. The wind wasn't moving the trees either. It was like the forest itself had held its breath, waiting for us to move. "We need to leave," Emily said suddenly, her voice breaking the stillness like a crack of thunder. "Now, we need to get out of here." Her words were final, the edge of panic in her voice unmistakable. None of us argued. We stood up quickly, as if there was something in the air that pushed us forward, something that didn't allow for hesitation. We started packing up in a hurried, frantic manner, each of us glancing over our shoulders, half expecting to see someone lurking in the trees. The more we packed, the more I felt it. Something was coming closer, drawing near, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. But every time I turned, it was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, breathing with us, watching us. Every tree seemed to have eyes, every bush held something hidden within. And it wasn't just in my mind. I saw it in the others' faces too. The same look of unease, the same flicker of fear. We were all thinking it, but no one said it out loud. We were being watched. We hadn't been alone in the forest for a long time. We finished packing quickly, though it didn't feel quick enough. It felt like we were in slow motion, each minute dragging on. The more we moved, the more I felt something pulling at me, like the forest didn't want us to leave. The air grew heavier, thicker. And then, just as we were about to start down the trail, I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, near the trees, two figures stood. They were barely visible in the early morning light, like shadows, tall, unmoving, just standing there. Their faces were hidden in the darkness of the forest, but I could feel them watching us. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. I just stared at them, feeling the weight of their gaze on me. "Ben?" Emily's voice broke through the thick silence, her hand on my shoulder. "What is it?" I didn't answer at first. I couldn't. I just pointed toward the trees. "Look," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The others turned to look, but when they did, the figures were gone. "Nothing there," Liam said, though his voice wasn't as sure as it usually was. "You're just seeing things. It's the light." But I knew what I saw. I wasn't imagining it. And I wasn't the only one who had seen them. "We need to leave now," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and urgency. I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and started down the trail, my heart racing. But no matter how fast I walked, the feeling didn't go away. It followed us, the watching, the presence. We weren't alone. Not anymore. And as the forest closed in behind us, I realized it was too late. The forest had already claimed us. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left them. Even back in the safety of their homes, they couldn't shake the memories of those figures in the woods. No one spoke of it again. What was there to say? Some things are better left forgotten. But every now and then, as the sun set and shadows stretched across their rooms, they couldn't help but wonder, were they still being watched? As Jamie stumbled away from the house, the cold night air did little to calm the storm inside him. His breaths were short, shallow, and each step felt heavier than the last. But he kept walking. He didn't look back again. He didn't dare. Yet, deep down, he knew it wasn't over. Some stories don't end when you leave the house. Some stories cling to you, follow you, whisper your name in the dark. That night, as Jamie lay awake in his own bed, he felt it again, that same oppressive presence, watching from the shadows. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a notification. A new photo had appeared in his gallery. He hadn't taken it. Hands shaking, he opened it. It was a picture of him, standing outside the house, but in the background, by the window, stood the faceless figure, Closer this time. Clearer. A chilling caption scrawled across the bottom read, "You can't escape a story you're part of." The screen flickered, then went black. The collector was still watching. The end. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this again.